Former President Donald Trump continued his revenge tour in Florida Saturday. His latest target, the Manhattan prosecutors who indicted his company and its chief financial officer. The former president calling the case prosecutorial misconduct. But he also seemed to acknowledge the tax schemes. Watch this.
They go after good, hard-working people for not paying taxes on a company car. Company car. You didn't pay tax on the car. Or a company apartment. You used an apartment because you need an apartment because you have to travel too far where your house is. You didn't pay tax. Or education for your grandchildren. I don't even know. Do you have to? But does anybody know the answer to that stuff? Okay? But they indict people for that.
Oh, boy. Okay. Joining me now is Jeff Mason, Reuters White House correspondent, A.B. Stoddard, associate editor and columnist for Real Clear Politics. And back with us is Chuck Rosenberg, former U.S. attorney and senior FBI official. Chuck, I think I have to start with you because it seems like perhaps the president just admitted to everything that the New York prosecutors have accused his companies of doing, basically just saying, yeah, we did it. Why is this a big deal? Nobody understands this. I mean, what did you hear? And if you're one of the prosecutors working on this case, what did you hear?
Good questions, Casey. Look, there aren't a lot of situations that I can think of where I would want Mr. Trump to keep talking. But if I were a prosecutor on this case, this would be one of them. Because, and without getting too technical here, the rules of evidence that will pertain at trial permit statements by representatives or agents of the company under certain circumstances to be admissible against the company at trial. And so the more he talks, the more he blathers, the more nonsense that he says, particularly about this case and what the company did or didn't do and what he knew or didn't know, all of that might help the prosecutors at trial prove the elements of the crimes against the Trump organization. So, look, I've never really thought it was a good idea for individuals or representatives of companies that were under investigation or under indictment to talk. If he thinks it's helpful, have at it. But if I were the prosecutor, I would have the same response. Have at it. Keep talking, because you're helping us.
Well, so, Jeff, let's talk about what this really is about, because it's not necessarily about the criminal investigation for the former presidents. It's about the politics. And so far, we have seen that his base of supporters has been willing to stick with him through thick and thin, and that suddenly perhaps even something like this, an indictment of his company, just simply won't even matter to any of them. I mean, do you think that's going to remain true in this case, especially now that, the president doesn't have keys to Twitter or Facebook anymore? This is kind of the only way right now that he's talking to his supporters en masse.
Well, you're right, Casey, that he doesn't have Facebook and Twitter, and that is a big difference between the sort of social media levers he had to pull during his presidency and what he has now. But to go back to what you were saying, former President Trump has always worked best with a foil, and he now has another foil. And so I think the answer to your question in terms of whether or not supporters will continue to stand by him is a definitive yes. And if anything, this will probably strengthen him politically, because it will give him the opportunity to continue to paint himself as being the victim of a witch hunt. That said, there are two tracks here, and you referenced them. There's the political track and there's the legal track. And depending on where that legal track goes, that will have an impact on his political career if, as he considers whether or not to run again, the legal jeopardy or the legal consequences he faces continue to rise.
So, AB, let's just pull on that point a little bit more, because we know that privately the president obsesses about these things. We're starting to hear even more about just the degree to which he does that in some of these books that are coming out as we start to get all of that exclusive reporting from the end of the Trump administration and the early months of the Biden administration. What do you think his thinking will be in this regard about 2024? I mean, the sort of outward posture is that he doesn't care, but privately the scenario seems pretty different.
Well, I mean, it's been very clear since January 6th when we learned in the weeks following just how much money the president had raised after he lost the election, or it was declared for President-elect Biden on November 7th, from his willing and fervent believers, that he would continue to tease out a 2024 run no matter what, because it keeps him in the game and it keeps the money flowing. What's interesting about this moment with him using this foil of this prosecution of Weisselberg and potentially others later is that he is supposed to be out at these rallies helping Republicans take the House back and potentially the Senate in 2022. And what he's doing instead is normalizing crimes. We know that he intentionally normalized lying in his presidency, something that Jonathan Rauch talks about in his new book really exquisitely, and I highly recommend it. It is a tactic of disinformation to make sure that people no longer know what to believe. And the second thing he did is to normalize crimes, like say things like it's no big deal. Why is this a law anyway? And this type of talk. And it's clear he's going to continue to do this in sort of a PR campaign at these, quote, rallies where he's helping Republican candidates. And I think in the end, while he thinks it's helping him and serving a purpose, it's a really questionable whether or not it's going to hinder Republicans in the midterm elections next year.
Yeah, every time Republicans seem to hope that President Trump is going to help them out with winning them more seats. And I think they've learned several times the hard way. It doesn't always work out like they hope it will. Chuck Rosenberg, let me ask you about what AB was just saying, this idea that the president here is trying to normalize a criminal activity. I mean, we saw some of this at the riot at the Capitol. I mean, people taking pictures of themselves committing crimes. That's a huge part of a lot of the evidence that they're using to prosecute people. How concerned are you about this potential normalization, especially among, I mean, President Trump's base does not represent a majority of the country by any stretch, but it's significant in size, and certainly the possible implications are significant.
Yeah, absolutely, Casey. So in one venue, I'm very concerned, and that's sort of, out there socially, politically. If crimes are normalized, if lying becomes normalized, look, I think we all suffer from that. But in another venue, I'm not at all concerned. In a court of law, I'm not the least bit concerned. Over and over again, the courts and judges and juries have been bulwarks against this sort of nonsense. And so the normalization of lies really has no place in a courtroom. So again, it depends where you're talking about it. I don't think the defense, this ought not be a law, is going to fly with any judge or any jury. It is the law, and prosecutors have appropriately charged it, and now we'll see whether or not they can prove it. But there are places where this type of normalization really, really hurts, and there are certain places where it doesn't matter at all.
All right, fair enough. Jeff Mason, A.B. Stoddard, Chuck Rosenberg, thank you all for spending some time during your holiday Monday to join us and offer your expertise. We really appreciate it.